Hello, my name is Dabria. At Christmas dinner, my husband didn't just forget me. He pointed to the kitchen and said I should sit there, because I was just a guest. His parents didn't flinch. They watched me take that walk, past the real dining table, past every name card with everyone else's place, into a room with no wine, no seat that mattered, no voice. They thought they could erase me quietly, cut me out of photos, strip my name from documents, move money under my identity, and call it tradition. But what they didn't know is that I was the one holding up their entire foundation, and with a single click, I let it all fall. But now I ask you, what would you have done? I had told myself all day to stay calm. It was Christmas after all, and I didn't want to start another argument with Corwin before we even reached his parents' house. I'd worked late, wrapping up end-of-year reports at the firm, and by the time I pulled into the long driveway, the sun had already disappeared behind the oaks. The big house glittered with lights. Too many, too bright. Through the windows I could see movement, people laughing, the kind of laughter that fills a room but leaves someone standing outside feeling small. I sat in the car for a moment, breathing, reminding myself that this was just dinner. I had been to dozens of them. Every year the same house, the same porcelain dishes, the same fake smiles. The only thing that changed was how far they'd go to remind me I didn't quite belong. Still, I took a deep breath, straightened my coat, and walked up the steps. The front door stood slightly open. Usually, Valora, my mother-in-law, greeted people there with a cocktail and a comment about their shoes. Not tonight. Inside, the smell of roasted ham and cinnamon candles wrapped around me like a memory I wasn't allowed to touch. The hallway shimmered with gold ornaments, and a speaker near the stairs hummed Bing Crosby's voice. It looked perfect, just like every holiday card Valora mailed out each year. No one noticed me. I slipped off my coat and hung it on the rack beside a dozen others. The murmur of conversation floated from the dining room, punctuated by the clink of glasses. I stepped toward the sound, smoothing the front of my dress. Corwin had said they would wait until I arrived before serving dinner. He'd said it in that careful tone of his, the one that sounds like a promise but never costs him anything. When I reached the dining room doorway, everything stopped. The table stretched the length of the room, heavy with food and crystal and candlelight. Every chair was filled. Corwin sat near the head, his tie loosened, his smile easy. For a moment, he looked almost happy until his eyes met mine. He froze, then gave me a polite half-wave, like I was someone he vaguely recognized from work. I looked for an empty chair. There wasn't one. Valora's eyes caught mine from the far end of the table, her lips curved into that same polite expression she used when she greeted bank managers. "Oh," she said, her voice light, almost sing-song. "You made it after all." Thane, my father-in-law, kept carving the ham as if nothing had happened. I waited, thinking someone would move, make space, offer a chair, something. The air grew tight. Forks paused mid-air. Corwin cleared his throat. "The kitchen table's set," he said finally, pointing behind him toward the doorway. "You can sit there tonight. We just ran out of room." The sentence landed like a slap. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. A few relatives glanced at each other, then back to their plates. Valora didn't blink. She sipped her wine, a picture of composure. Thane nodded slightly, as if approving the efficiency of the arrangement. A laugh escaped from somewhere down the table. "Guess that's what happens when you're late," someone said softly. I smiled. I don't know how, but I did. "Of course," I managed. My voice sounded steady, foreign. "Wouldn't want to trouble anyone." I turned and walked toward the kitchen. The music seemed louder in the next room, the voices fading behind me. The kitchen smelled of gravy and burnt sugar, a mix of warmth and exhaustion. On the counter sat a single plate, plastic, not china, and a paper napkin folded neatly beside it. Someone had poured water into a small glass, but no wine. A chair, the kind that folded flat for storage, waited near the corner of the counter. I sat down. From here, I could still hear the rhythm of conversation from the other room. Laughter, the scraping of silverware, the faint ringing of cutlery against porcelain. Every sound carried like an echo of exclusion. The table in front of me looked like something set for a child or a servant. I picked up my fork and started eating. The food was cold. For a moment, I stared at the pattern of light reflecting off the backsplash tile. It shimmered like ripples in water. I'd spent years teaching myself to ignore these little humiliations, the accidental wrong place cards, the missed invitations, the birthday calls that came a day late, each one small enough to dismiss, together heavy enough to crush. Valora liked to pretend we were a family built on tradition. She didn't say control, but that's what she meant. And Corwin, my husband, followed along because it kept the peace. He called it diplomacy. I called it cowardice. I thought about how many times I'd told myself to let it go, how many times I'd stayed silent for the sake of harmony. I'd convinced myself it was maturity, wisdom. Maybe it was just fatigue. A burst of laughter erupted from the dining room, startling me. Someone clinked a glass, probably making a toast. I imagined Valora standing, thanking everyone for being such a close family. The words would come smoothly, rehearsed, the same lines every year. She'd glance around the table, nodding at each face, everyone but mine. I looked down at the plate. I'd barely touched the food. My appetite had left somewhere between his pointing finger and the plastic fork. The refrigerator hummed beside me. Time stretched. I heard footsteps behind me and turned, half hoping it was Corwin. But it was one of the cousins, rushing in for another bottle of wine. She froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said, awkward, reaching past me into the fridge. "Didn't realize anyone was sitting here." "It's fine," I replied. "You can grab what you need." She nodded quickly and left, not looking back. The door swung closed, muting the noise again. I looked around the room. Every surface gleamed. Valora's doing. She liked order, liked control disguised as hospitality. A spotless kitchen meant a spotless conscience. I took a breath and let it out slowly. My fingers brushed the edge of the table. There were faint scratches in the wood, the kind made by years of cutting and chopping and cleaning. I wondered how many times Valora had stood in this room pretending it was her kingdom. I reached for my phone but stopped. What would I even text Corwin? "Nice of you to remember I exist?" No, that would only start another fight later about tone, about appearances. He'd say, "You always take things too personally, Debria." That was his favorite line. I folded the napkin neatly and set it aside. My mind started replaying everything that had led here. The dinner 2 years ago when they forgot to include my photo in the family card. The Easter brunch where Valora announced that real family sticks to blood. And now this, my designated seat by the dishwasher. I picked up my glass of water, held it up toward the doorway, and whispered quietly, "Cheers." The faintest sound of laughter drifted from the next room. My training as a financial analyst had taught me something important. The moment you react emotionally, you lose leverage. Information is power, timing is strategy, and silence is often the strongest move on the board. So I sat still. I finished the meal, every bland bite. I didn't leave the kitchen right away. Instead, I watched their reflections flicker on the polished glass cabinets, the blurred silhouettes of people who thought cruelty could be hidden under manners. They'd forgotten something. Numbers don't lie, but people do, and I knew exactly how much of their world depended on my quiet competence. I smiled to myself, a small, private gesture. Maybe they thought I was humiliated, small, beaten down. But humiliation can turn sharp when you let it rest long enough. Maybe next time, they'd learn what it felt like to be the ones left standing in the cold. I didn't leave. I watched. I stayed where I was, in that quiet kitchen, pretending the hum of the refrigerator was company. The laughter from the dining room softened, then swelled again. No one had noticed I hadn't joined them. Maybe that was the point. I could see them through the reflection in the glass cabinet doors. Shapes moving, hands lifting glasses, someone leaning to whisper into someone else's ear. The whole picture looked like a family portrait come to life, except I wasn't in it. The clock on the wall caught my eye. It was just shy of 8. That couldn't be right. The invitation Valora mailed out said dinner would begin at 8. Yet here they were, already halfway through dessert, coffee cups steaming beside their plates. The calculation was simple. They'd moved the dinner up, and no one thought to tell me. Or maybe someone thought very carefully about it. I remember the day the invitation arrived. Cream paper, gold lettering. Valora's handwriting slanted perfectly across the envelope. Family dinner, 8 p.m. She'd even drawn a small heart next to her signature, as though affection could be printed. I'd smiled at it then, foolishly taking it at face value. From where I sat, I could hear Sable's laugh. It had that practiced brightness that always sounded like an act. She'd married Corwin's brother, and since then she'd made sure everyone knew she was the model daughter-in-law, the kind who remembered birthdays, baked pies, and never contradicted Valora in public. The dining room door swung open, spilling light and chatter into the kitchen. Sable walked in, holding a wine glass and her phone. She stopped when she saw me sitting at the folding table. A slow smile spread across her face, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, look at you," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "At least you're close to the oven, where women like us belong, right?" Her laugh carried back into the dining room, and a few people chuckled, pretending they hadn't heard. I met her gaze for a moment, then looked away. "I guess every family needs someone to keep the kitchen warm," I said softly. Sable tilted her head. "Oh, honey, don't take it so seriously. You know how Valora is. She likes things just so. We all just try to keep up." She sipped her wine and lingered a moment longer, studying me like a bug pinned under glass. "You should come out when you're done. Everyone's asking about you." That was a lie. No one had said my name all evening. When she left, her perfume hung in the air, something floral and sharp, like a mask for something rotting underneath. I glanced back at the clock. The minute hand barely moved. The night felt like it was being stretched on purpose. I began piecing it together, the little mistakes that had built up over the years. Thanksgiving last year, when I'd been told to bring dessert, only to find an entire bakery spread waiting when I arrived. "Oh, we weren't sure if you'd make it," Valora had said then, with that perfect smile. Or the summer barbecue, when my seat had been double booked and they'd handed me a folding chair by the trash bins, claiming it was temporary. None of it was accidental. It never had been. They'd rewritten the rules one gathering at a time until my presence became optional, then inconvenient. And tonight, they'd made it official. No seat, no name card, no invitation worth trusting. From the dining room came the sound of Valora's voice, warm and commanding. "Isn't family what matters most? You can always count on blood." The irony almost made me laugh. Corwin said something I couldn't hear, and everyone laughed. His laugh blended right in, easy and untroubled. He'd once told me, "It's just how Mom is. Don't let it get under your skin." He never saw that what slid under my skin stayed there like a splinter. I leaned back in my chair, listening. Every story, every joke, each one had a place at that table, except me. The kitchen lights buzzed softly overhead. I reached for the water glass beside me and took a sip. No wine for me tonight, just water, clear and tasteless. "Wine is for family," I murmured to myself. "Water's for the help." I set the glass down, the sound small but satisfying. I wasn't crying. Not this time. My tears had retired long before this dinner. Instead, I studied them the way I might study a balance sheet, watching for the weaknesses, the hidden debts, the moments when the numbers didn't quite add up. Valora lifted her glass again. "To loyalty," she said, "and to those who understand where they belong." The table echoed her toast. I felt the corners of my mouth curve slightly, not in amusement, but in recognition. She had no idea how right she was. I let my mind drift for a moment. Years ago, when Corwin and I first married, I used to believe belonging was something you earned through effort, patience, kindness, compromise. I tried to fit their rhythm, their preferences, their unspoken rules. But families like theirs weren't about inclusion. They were about hierarchy. Valora had spent decades building her little empire of manners and manipulation. And Corwin, he just wanted peace, even if that meant sacrificing me to keep it. A burst of laughter snapped me back. Sable again, telling some story about a coworker who didn't know her place. She was good at that, twisting everyday words until they became weapons that sounded polite. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Corwin hadn't texted to ask where I was or how I was doing. I could have been halfway across town and he wouldn't have noticed. I thought of leaving, grabbing my coat, walking out into the cold night air, but something in me resisted. I wanted to see the whole performance. I wanted to know exactly how far they'd go when they thought I'd given up. The laughter rose again. Someone started music, an old jazz record Valora adored. The notes drifted through the air like ghosts from another time. I stayed seated, letting the noise wash over me. Every smile in that room was part of the same play, every glance choreographed. But even the best performances end eventually, and when the lights come up, the truth is still there, waiting in the dark. Corwin leaned toward his mother, whispering something that made her grin. His hand rested casually on her shoulder. Watching him, I felt the quiet click of realization inside me, like the final number in a long equation sliding into place. They weren't just ignoring me, they were aligning themselves against me. I picked up the napkin and folded it carefully, my fingers steady. I thought of the spreadsheets, the contracts, the passwords, every silent thread that held their comfort together. They'd built their world on my competence, and they didn't even know it. When the dinner ended, I'd stand, walk past them, and smile. I'd thank Valora for the lovely evening, thank Corwin for saving me a seat, and then I'd go home. But not before I memorized every word, every look. Because next time, I wouldn't walk into a dinner, I'd walk into a setup. After everyone had finished eating, the noise in the house softened into that after-dinner lull, the kind where people leaned back, full and smug, pretending the night had gone perfectly. I stayed seated in the kitchen until I heard chairs scrape against the hardwood and plates being cleared. That was my cue to move. I didn't want to face them, but curiosity, no, confirmation, pulled me back toward the main hallway. I slipped off the folding chair, smoothed the wrinkles from my dress, and walked quietly past the swinging kitchen door. The dining room lights glowed softer now, dimmed for the afterglow. A few guests milled about with drinks in hand, drifting toward the living room. I stayed near the edge of the hallway, letting the hum of conversation cover me. That's when I saw it. The hallway had always been Valora's pride, the family gallery, as she called it. Every inch of wall space was lined with framed photos, weddings, vacations, graduations, the carefully curated life of a respectable Texas family. Each frame gleamed in gold or mahogany, lit by recessed lighting. I'd walked this hallway countless times before, never really seeing it for what it was, a scoreboard. My gaze landed on one frame larger than the rest, Christmas 2022. I stopped. I knew that photo. I remembered that day vividly. I'd worn a dark green dress and stood beside Corwin near the tree. Valora had insisted on arranging everyone by height and color coordination. She'd spent 20 minutes positioning us before the photographer snapped the picture. We'd all laughed, or at least the others had. I'd smiled for the camera, thinking maybe, just maybe, it would be different that year. But the picture hanging on the wall didn't have me in it. It was the same setup, the same pose, same tree, same dog curled by the fire. But the space where I should have been was now filled with the arm of a chair and a small decorative pillow. The edit was flawless. Unless you knew what to look for, you wouldn't see anything missing. My breath caught. My hand went to the frame, fingertips brushing the smooth glass. The label at the bottom still read, Family Christmas 2022. I stared at it longer than I should have, the noise around me fading until all I could hear was the thud of my pulse. Someone had taken the time to crop me out, not forget, not overlook, remove. A chill rolled through me, though the air inside the house was warm. I forced myself to step back, to look at the other photos. Wedding anniversaries, family trips to Galveston, Thanksgiving group shots. The pattern revealed itself with a cruel kind of precision. Photos from the past 2 years contained no trace of me. In one, my reflection in a window had been blurred. In another, the corner where I once stood had been replaced by a vase. This wasn't erasure by accident. This was a rewrite. Valora's voice floated down the hall. Everyone to the living room. Let's relive our beautiful year together. I let go of the frame and followed the sound, my legs moving without my permission. The crowd gathered in front of the television, wine glasses in hand. Valora stood near the mantel, remote in her perfectly manicured hand. Corwin was beside her, one arm slung loosely across the back of the couch, his smile fixed and ready. The TV flickered on, and the first slide appeared. Our family, our joy. Photos filled the screen. Birthdays, pool parties, beach trips, dinners, soft piano music played beneath it, the kind of melody that usually makes people nostalgic. Around me, guests chuckled, called out inside jokes. I stood near the doorway, just out of frame, watching each picture shift like a scene in a movie I wasn't part of. I had been at every one of those events. I remembered the heat of the sun at the July barbecue, the mosquito bites, the way I'd carried trays of lemonade back and forth while everyone else lounged. But in the slideshow, I wasn't there. Slide after slide, they toasted, smiled, clapped when Valora's face appeared. Corwin popped up often, cutting a ribbon at a company event, standing beside his parents on the porch, lifting a champagne glass. My absence was louder than any presence could have been. At one point, a picture of the Thanksgiving table filled the screen. The angle was wide enough to show the entire room. My seat, near the end of the table, sat empty. They'd even left the chair pulled back, as though to suggest I'd never shown up. Someone behind me whispered, "That was such a special night." The family dog appeared next, 4 times, maybe 5. Even the golden retriever had better representation than I did. Valora turned toward the group, misty-eyed. "This," she said, voice trembling with pride, "this is what family means. We've had our ups and downs, but we always come back together." The room erupted in soft applause. I felt something splinter inside, not a sharp crack, more like a slow split. I closed my eyes and breathed through it. Leaving would have been easy, but there was power in stillness. I stood there, letting the moment soak into memory. They hadn't forgotten me. They had scrubbed me clean from their narrative. I thought about every time I'd tried to belong, brought dishes to potlucks, offered rides, remembered birthdays, smiled through snubs, all of it erased, just like the pixels that had deleted me from their photos. The slideshow ended with a picture of the family standing on the front porch, arms linked, the house glowing behind them. Valora raised her glass again. "To family! To family!" they echoed. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I watched the screen fade to black, then turn blue. My reflection appeared faintly in it. Me, standing behind everyone else, ghost-like. I turned and walked back toward the hallway, away from the applause. The portrait of Christmas 2022 caught the light as I passed. The glare from the chandelier made it shimmer, and for a second, I imagined I could see the faint outline of where I once stood. In the quiet, I remembered something from a few weeks ago, an email chain from Sable about the slideshow. She'd sent it to the family group chat, but I'd been copied accidentally. "I'll handle the photos this year," she'd written. "Just the core family, Debria. Don't worry." I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Now, those words came back, heavy as lead. Just the core family. So that was what I was now, an accessory removed for aesthetic balance. I stood there until the sounds from the living room began to fade again. Music resuming, conversation shifting to safer topics. Corwin's laughter drifted faintly down the hall. I pressed my hand to the frame one last time, then let it fall away. My reflection looked back at me, small and half-lit by the chandelier. They'd erased me, yes, but I was still standing in their house, still breathing their air, still seeing every detail they believed invisible. And in that silence, I knew. I was no longer trying to belong. The air in the hallway still held the faint smell of cinnamon candles and ham grease when the laughter from the living room swelled again. The slideshow had ended, but the night wasn't done humiliating me. I moved toward the large tree standing in the corner near the fireplace. Wrapping paper littered the floor like confetti after a parade. Children's laughter spilled through the room as they unwrapped gifts. I stood behind one of the couches, trying to appear invisible. The smallest boy, Sable's son, was tearing open a large box wrapped in gold paper. His shriek filled the room. "It's the train set! The one from the commercial!" I froze. That was my gift. I'd spent weeks searching for it, a handmade model train painted in vintage blue, the kind Corwin used to love when he was a child. I had placed the order with a craftsman in Vermont and paid extra for engraving the boy's initials on the engine. Valora clapped her hands and smiled grandly. "Oh, look what Grandma got you, darling!" The boy jumped into her arms. "Thank you, Grandma Valora." The room filled with approving noises, a chorus of "so thoughtful" and "that's just perfect." Corwin looked over his shoulder at me, eyes flicking between guilt and avoidance, then quickly turned back toward his mother. I wanted to step forward, to say something, anything, but the words stuck somewhere between my chest and throat. Valora turned slightly, catching my eye. For a second, her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. She knew. She knew it was mine. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a polite smile. "Lovely gift," I said quietly, my voice barely reaching the air. "Thank you," she replied smoothly, lifting her wine glass as though accepting an award. It wasn't just a stolen credit, it was a performance, hers, flawless as always. I turned toward the kitchen before anyone could see my face. Inside, the counters were now stacked with desserts. The smell of sugar and coffee mixed with the faint metallic chill from the open fridge. I leaned against the counter, reached for my purse, and pulled out my phone. I opened my email and searched for the receipt. There it was, dated 3 weeks ago, confirmation number, shipping details, signature from the craftsman who'd sent me pictures of the finished train. I stared at it for a long moment, the glow of the screen lighting my hands. It wasn't a mix-up, it was deliberate. Someone had intercepted the package, switched the tag, rewritten the story. No one had asked. No one had thought it mattered. I closed the email, turned off the screen, and set the phone down gently beside the sink. "Dabria?" It was Sable's voice behind me. She'd appeared again, barefoot now, glass in hand. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. "Everything okay? You disappeared during the slideshow." "Just needed air," I said, managing a calm tone. She smiled, swirling the wine in her glass. "You should relax. Mom always says you take things too personally." I looked at her, holding her gaze. "And I guess she taught you that being cruel is just part of good manners?" Sable blinked, then laughed softly. "You've got quite the imagination. It's just family traditions, honey. Don't make it bigger than it is." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I won't." "I think it's big enough already." She hesitated, then turned away, muttering something under her breath about me being touchy. I waited until she was gone, then exhaled slowly. From the other room, I heard Thane's voice rise above the chatter. "Let's gather, everyone. One last toast before the night ends." I walked back toward the dining room. The table had been cleared, replaced by glasses and desserts. Valora and Thane stood near the head, the very picture of success and propriety. The guests circled around them. I stayed on the edge again, next to the wall, where shadows reached. Thane lifted his glass. "To family," he began, his tone deep and measured. "To the people who hold us steady through storms, who remind us where we come from." Everyone echoed softly. "To family." He continued. "We're blessed with strong, loyal women in this family, our shining daughters-in-law, who keep us proud." A round of clapping followed. He turned toward Sable. "To Sable, who brings light and grace to our gatherings." Sable's smile widened, cheeks glowing with pride. "And to Evelyn," Thane added, nodding toward a cousin's wife. "You've been a wonderful addition to our home." Applause again. Valora beamed. My name never came. The silence where it should have been was louder than any applause could have been. Corwin shifted, eyes dropping to his drink. Someone patted my shoulder briefly, one of Valora's friends, murmuring, "You must be so proud of them." I managed a polite nod. When the toast ended, people began hugging, exchanging pleasantries, preparing to leave. Valora moved through the room like a hostess on a stage, receiving compliments, basking in admiration. I waited until the crowd thinned, then turned toward the door. Outside, the night was cold, the kind of cold that bit through fabric and memory alike. I stepped onto the porch, wrapped my coat tighter, and let the winter air burn my lungs. The lights from inside spilled through the window panes, turning the snow in the yard gold. For the first time all evening, I could breathe. The sky was clear, quiet, vast. I tilted my head back and exhaled, watching the breath turn white. Inside, I could still hear them laughing faintly, the sound muffled now, distant. They'd taken my seat. They'd erased my face from their photos. Now they'd even stolen credit for my kindness. My name meant nothing in that house, not even worth a mention in a toast. I thought of all the signatures I'd placed on company paperwork, all the access I had to the accounts Valora pretended to control. They'd underestimated me in ways they couldn't imagine. I took my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up, showing the finance app I'd built years ago to monitor family assets. A small lock icon blinked in the corner, waiting. I didn't press it yet, not tonight, but it felt comforting knowing I could. The wind picked up, scattering a few pine needles from the wreath above the door. I brushed one off my coat sleeve. Inside, I heard Corwin's voice faintly. "She's just tired, Mom. It's been a long week." Valora's answer floated back, smug and clear. "Tired of pretending, maybe." I smiled. They thought they'd silenced me with exclusion, but silence has its uses. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, turned toward the driveway, and walked a few steps into the night. The crunch of snow beneath my shoes was steady, deliberate. I wasn't angry anymore. I was planning. "You've taken my seat, my face, my name," I whispered into the wind. "Let's see what happens when I take your foundation." The porch light flickered behind me, a faint, trembling glow. Somewhere inside, another round of laughter echoed. I turned back once, just long enough to memorize the image, the perfect family framed by glass, unaware that their reflection had already begun to crack. I gave them one last chance to step back. That night, after I left the porch and the golden shadows of their perfect world behind, I didn't drive home right away. I pulled into a quiet parking lot outside a closed pharmacy and sat there with my headlights off. The wind had picked up. The branches in the trees moved like hands trying to pull back something that had already fallen away. I scrolled through my phone, not out of habit, but to ground myself. Old photos, receipts, a note I'd once written to myself during a meeting with Corwin and Thane about company equity. You matter. Just because they minimize you doesn't mean they've taken anything real. At 11:16 p.m., a notification pinged across my screen. My bank app lit up with an alert. Suspicious login attempt. Joint account ending in 0824. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. I just stared at the words. A second alert followed. Transfer of $45,000 initiated to Valora Family Trust, pending authorization. The trust was something I'd helped structure 2 years ago. Corwin had come to me with Valora's legacy idea. Preserve the family name, manage assets smartly. I'd designed it so every transaction required dual consent. It was a protection, not from outsiders, but from impulsive decisions. And now, someone had tried to override it. I logged in. The transfer was paused. One more wrong move, and it would trigger a full freeze. I closed the app, placed the phone in my lap, and stared out the windshield. The pharmacy lights clicked off inside. By the time I returned to the house, most guests had left. Only a few stayed behind to sip last glasses of wine and murmur goodbyes. I stepped inside and hung up my coat without a sound. Valora stood in the living room, gathering empty plates from the sideboard like some generous monarch after a feast. Corwin was on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through something meaningless. I walked in with the quiet confidence I once saved for boardroom negotiations. No one noticed me at first. Then Sable turned, her glass midway to her lips. "Look who's back," she said softly, nudging her husband. Corwin looked up. "You okay?" I ignored the question. I walked to the center of the room and cleared my throat. "If anyone wants to take credit again," I began, my voice calm and steady, "they should also take responsibility for theft." The air froze. Valora looked up from the plates, feigning confusion. "I'm sorry?" I took out my phone and tapped. The screen illuminated the invoice. "This is the receipt for the train set. Paid by me. Custom ordered. Delivered 2 weeks ago." I held the phone for everyone to see, turning slowly like I was presenting evidence in court. Whispers rippled through the room. Sable shifted uncomfortably. Valora gave a light laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Dabria! It's a toy! You're blowing this out of proportion." Corwin stood now, moving closer. Let's not do this here. I turned to him. You knew, didn't you? His face betrayed him before he said anything. The flicker of guilt, the glance to his mother, the way his jaw tensed. She just wanted the moment, he mumbled. It's family. What does it matter who signs the gift? It matters when your name gets stolen for a donation, I said sharply. It matters when people take what isn't theirs and pretend it always belonged to them. Thane entered the room, wiping his hands with a cloth napkin. What's all this? I turned to him. The trust. Someone tried to move money without my consent. $45,000. He blinked, surprised. That's impossible. I pulled the email from the bank onto the screen. Pending, attempted at 11:16. I was sitting in a parking lot when I got the alert. The silence thickened. Valora stepped forward. This is family, Dabria. We don't need to keep score. A guest, one of Corwin's cousins, let out a nervous chuckle. Corwin tried to laugh it off. You're overreacting. It's just tradition. We do what we do to make things run smoothly. I took a slow breath. And traditions built on lies collapse fast. Valora's face hardened. The mask cracked. For the first time all evening, she looked at me not with polite dismissal, but with calculation. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small manila envelope. I set it on the coffee table. What is that? Sable asked, her voice brittle. Documentation, I said. Signed statement from the vendor. Screenshots, digital trail, and this. I tapped the folded paper inside. A memo from my attorney. A gentle reminder that using someone's name without consent, especially in financial matters, constitutes fraud in the state of Texas. Corwin ran a hand down his face. You didn't have to go this far. I warned you, I said simply. Valora crossed her arms. You always take things so personally, Dabria. Always the victim. It's exhausting. I stepped closer. You took my place at the table. My face from the photos, my name from the credits, and now my financial identity? No, not anymore. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Corwin looked at the envelope like it might catch fire. I'm not your ghost, I said quietly. I don't haunt the edges of this family waiting to be seen. You don't get to use my presence as convenience and erase it when it doesn't fit the picture. I let that sit for a beat. Then I picked up the envelope and handed it directly to Corwin. Keep it, I said. You'll need it. I turned to leave, but paused. My voice dropped into the kind of stillness that only comes from knowing the room has finally heard you. If any of you touch what's mine again, I said, you'll lose more than a name on a tag. No one followed me as I walked to the door. I didn't expect them to. They were too stunned. Not because I'd raised my voice, I hadn't, but because I'd finally refused to be part of the game. The air outside was colder than before, biting at the space between my gloves and sleeves. I got into my car, started the engine, and didn't turn the heat on. I needed the cold. It helped me think. Back on the road, the town was quiet. A few houses still had their Christmas lights on. Somewhere, a radio host was talking about resolutions and fresh starts. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on my lap, feeling the weight of everything that had just shifted. I had drawn a line, and I wasn't stepping back. By the time I pulled into the driveway the next morning, the air had warmed just enough to melt the icicles clinging to the gutters. Water trickled down like silent punctuation marks on everything I hadn't said the night before. I hadn't slept much, maybe 2 hours, tops, but exhaustion didn't feel heavy. It felt sharp, clarifying. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside my home, and tossed my keys on the entry table. My coffee pot blinked 7:08. I poured a cup, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop like I'd done every weekday morning for the past 3 years, because work, unlike people, respected boundaries. Emails, a few flagged items, a meeting request from a vendor. And then, one tab over, I opened the internal dashboard for the company, just to check, just to make sure that the financial silence I'd imposed last night hadn't created unnecessary fallout. I navigated to the shareholder ledger, and then I stopped breathing. My name wasn't there. I hit refresh, twice, checked the drop-down filters, expanded the date range. Nothing. No record of Debria L. Whitmore listed among the owners. The ledger, which I had reviewed quarterly for years, now showed only 4 names: Corwin, Valora, Thane, and a shell entity I didn't recognize. My cursor hovered for a moment before I reached for my phone. I didn't call anyone. I took a screenshot, downloaded the PDF, forwarded it to my attorney with a subject line that read, "Get ready." Not 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, this time from my credit monitoring service. New account opened under your name. Credit limit, $250,000. Co-signed authorization received. I hadn't applied for any credit. I hadn't signed anything. I clicked the link. The lender was a regional bank I didn't even use. The signature on file looked like mine, but it wasn't. It was the kind of signature someone creates from memory. Sloppy. Not even close to legal. The date? 2 weeks ago. I sat back, the warmth of the coffee mug forgotten in my hand. This wasn't just petty. This wasn't personal offense. This was fraud. I checked my email again, heart still steady, mind burning. Attached to the account creation form was the digital authorization. The IP address didn't belong to me, but it was familiar. It matched the network for the family office, Valora's domain. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things or cry. I got up, walked to my printer, and printed out every single document. A stack of facts. Paper armor. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. Corwin answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, his voice tight. "I was going to call you. You're a little late." "I figured you'd be mad, but it's not what you think." "Someone removed me from the ownership ledger," I said plainly, "and someone opened a line of credit under my name without consent. Want to explain that?" Silence. Then, "It's for the family. We needed capital. Short term. You're part of it, right?" My jaw tightened. "No, Corwin," I said. "You made that perfectly clear when you pointed to the kitchen." He sighed. "My mother just thinks we need clearer roles." "Oh, I agree," I replied, voice cold. "What you need now is a lawyer." I hung up. No theatrics, no back and forth, just facts. Over the next hour, I froze every joint account. I revoked power of attorney I had once, naively, granted for convenience. I locked down all access to accounts tied to my LLCs and corporate assets. By noon, I'd submitted a formal complaint to the bank and filed a police report for identity theft. By 2 o'clock, I sent a certified notice to the family business titled Revocation of Consent to Use Name, Signature, or Likeness in Financial Dealings. Attached were a notarized affidavit confirming the forged signature, a copy of the IP trace from the bank, screenshots of every document I'd compiled. I blind copied my attorney on everything. At 3:47 p.m., my phone rang again. It was Valora. I let it go to voicemail. When the message came in, I sat back and listened. "You need to stop making a spectacle of yourself," she began. "This is family business, not a courtroom. You're creating damage you can't undo." There it was, the real voice behind the smile. Corwin texted next. "Can we talk?" I didn't know it would go this far. Too late. By 5 p.m., I was at the bank, submitting paperwork to have the unauthorized loan frozen and under review. I spoke calmly, clearly, professionally. The woman behind the counter asked, "Do you want to press charges if fraud is confirmed?" I paused for a moment, then said, "Absolutely." It wasn't revenge, it was rectification. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, sorting the remaining papers. The silence of my home felt peaceful, not empty. I didn't miss their voices. What struck me most wasn't the betrayal. It was the precision of their assumption. They thought I'd stay quiet. They believed that if they erased my name, it meant I'd stop existing in the equation. But I wasn't noise in their lives. I was structure. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd removed their own foundation. And that, I'd let them discover the hard way. I lay in bed with the glow of my phone screen washing over my face, my heart surprisingly still. I'd done it. Clicked through every layer, locked down every joint account, severed every financial tether that held me to their world. It was final, silent, cold, just like them. But peace didn't last long. The retaliation didn't take days. It took hours. By mid-morning, my phone was lighting up with notifications, not financial this time, but social. My name started appearing in places it hadn't before, not as praise, not as gratitude, but as gossip. At first, it was subtle. A neighbor from church messaged me, "Heard things have been rough. If you ever want to talk." Then a distant cousin posted a cryptic comment under a photo of the Whitmore Christmas gathering. Not everyone understands loyalty. The words came like smoke from under a door, just enough to know fire was spreading somewhere close by. Sable, always the passive-aggressive poet, posted a picture of her kids in matching pajamas with a caption that read, "Real family shows up, fake family unravels." The comments under it? Dozens. All saying things like, "Preach, facts only," and "Some people don't deserve a seat at the table." They weren't hiding it anymore. I was now the villain in their retelling. The worst came later that afternoon. A woman I barely knew from the charity board I served on pulled me aside in the grocery store. "I don't want to intrude," she said, eyes flicking toward the soup cans I was examining. "But Valora mentioned you've been having a hard time, emotionally." I just stared at her. That same polite smile I'd been practicing for years surfaced like a reflex. "She said you might step away from the board soon," she added, voice soft with feigned concern. "So that's how they wanted to erase me now, frame me as unstable, discredit my presence before I could even speak." By the time I got back to my car, the numbness had worn off. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was insulted and angry. I needed grounding, something real. I needed her. Hestia. I dialed her number while sitting in the driver's seat, engine running, but going nowhere. Her voice, when she answered, brought immediate tears to my eyes, though I blinked them back hard. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her tone warm, slow, familiar. "Grandma," I said, swallowing hard, "how are you?" "I'm all right," she replied. "A little lonely last night, though. I thought I'd see you." I hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Well, I waited. Thought you might stop by after dinner. I even made that lemon cake you like, but I figured maybe something came up." I gripped the steering wheel. "You weren't invited?" "Invited?" She laughed softly. "They said it was for immediate family only." The words cut like nothing else had. "They said what?" I asked, voice sharper than I meant. Hestia was quiet for a moment. "They told me it was a smaller gathering. Nothing big. I didn't want to cause trouble." "You're his grandmother. You've never missed Christmas." "Maybe they're just trying something different," she offered gently, always trying to smooth things over, even while being discarded. But I knew better. They hadn't just tried to erase me. They'd started scrubbing out the only person who had ever shown me unconditional love in that house. I ended the call with a promise to visit her soon. I didn't say much else. There was no point in giving her more to worry about. But I didn't go home. I drove. And somewhere between the streetlights and the quiet of the evening, I made my decision. I parked outside Hestia's house but didn't go in. I sat in the car, my fingers hovering over my phone as I opened the back end of the financial systems I still had access to, systems they had clearly forgotten I built, connected, managed. First, the joint investment accounts, locked, then the corporate cards under my name, funding everything from Thane's golf retreats to Valora's charity events. Disabled. Next, the tax shelters, the quiet trusts, the lines of credit that made the family empire look seamless on the outside. I clicked through each one by one, clicking disable, freeze, revoke, not in rage, not in haste. With precision, the same way they had cut me from pictures, untagged me in posts, cropped me out of speeches. I'd been the invisible hand behind the family's financial stability. Now I was the one removing it. At midnight, I composed an email. Subject line, Your legacy. To Corwin. Body, you erased me from the table. Now try living without the legs. I hit send. I didn't even watch the message fly off the screen. I turned off the phone, leaned back in the driver's seat, and stared at the ceiling of the car. My breath fogged the window. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since this whole farce began, I slept. It was a short sleep, but deep, heavy, restorative. At 6:23 a.m., my phone came alive. Messages, pings, alerts. Card declined. Why can't I access the system? Who froze payroll? Dad, call the bank now. I read them without reaction. Valora's name popped up next. Voicemail. I pressed play. You ungrateful child? What have you done? You've humiliated us. Do you have any idea what you're starting? We will not be destroyed by your tantrums. This family will survive, with or without you. Click. I saved the message. Label, for court. I lay back in bed, letting the morning light trickle through the curtains. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't crying. I was done. They wanted me invisible. They got it, but not in the way they planned. I whispered to the empty room. I told you not to test me. 2 days later, I was sitting at my desk reviewing client files when my assistant buzzed through the intercom. Debria, there's someone here to see you. Actually, 2, plus an attorney. I didn't ask who. I already knew. I smoothed my blouse, pushed my chair back, and stood with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. I walked to the conference room and found them already seated, Valora in a pale suit like she'd walked straight out of a country club board meeting, Corwin beside her in a stiff jacket, and a man I recognized from one of their family's previous legal situations. Debria, Corwin said, standing halfway before sitting again, trying to appear respectful. We'd like to talk. Valora didn't even look at me as I sat across from them. Let's just fix this, Corwin continued. This doesn't have to be a public mess. Public? I raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. Valora finally spoke. You've embarrassed us. You've gone too far. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. I slid it toward their attorney, who opened it slowly, silently. Inside, screenshots of the unauthorized credit line, the falsified ownership records, audio files transcribed from voicemails. Then I opened my laptop, joined a Zoom meeting, and the face of my lawyer appeared on screen. Ms. E. Whitmore, he nodded toward me. Good morning. Then to them. We're ready for deposition anytime. We also have the IRS flagged in, considering the trust violations. I'd recommend you review the memo on page 3 before making any statements. Valora's lips tightened. Corwin looked like he'd swallowed glass. Let's not be dramatic, their attorney interjected, trying to regain control. No, I said, voice steady. Let's be factual. They didn't argue. They didn't apologize. They packed their papers and left with as little noise as possible. Later that evening, I went to visit Hestia. I brought her a small bouquet of the daisies she loved and a tin of her favorite tea. She opened the door in her bathrobe and a pair of house slippers that had clearly seen decades of holiday mornings. Come in, sugar, she said, pulling me into a hug so full I felt my shoulders soften. We sat in her kitchen, sipping from chipped teacups. Her old radio played something soft and jazzy in the background. My nephew, Sable's youngest, was playing with toy blocks on the rug nearby. He looked up at me with big, innocent eyes. Grandma said you weren't invited because you always make people uncomfortable. The room fell quiet. Hestia's hand froze on her cup. I turned to him and smiled gently, not for him, but because children are never the problem. They only repeat what they've heard. Is that so? I said softly. He nodded, already turning back to his blocks. Hestia shook her head. He doesn't know what he's saying. He knows exactly what he heard, I interrupted gently. And now so do I. We didn't talk much more about it. She poured another cup. We sat, the warmth of her kitchen making the world outside feel distant, but inside, I was already sealing more locks. By the next day, news was out. Quiet circles turned loud. Word spread through the corporate network that Corwin's firm had lost 2 of their biggest clients. Rumors of fraud, misuse of power, questions about structure. Valora posted a statement on social media, something vague and performative. In times of hardship, we lean on grace. Family isn't always perfect, but love conquers all. The comment section didn't offer grace. People remembered. They watched. They weren't blind. She cut her own granddaughter out of the photo, one commenter wrote. Another added, sounds like someone got caught and wants sympathy. Sable's profile disappeared 3 hours later. Deleted. Gone. Thane, in a desperate attempt to save face, called Hestia. left her a voicemail. "Mom, we need to talk about the story that's spreading. We need your voice. You know how things can look." Hestia played the message for me later. She didn't even bother responding. "I've never been fond of liars," she said simply, setting her tea down. Then she looked at me and smiled. "You've handled this better than any of us ever could have." For the first time in a long time, I believed it. That week, I received an invitation to speak at a seminar focused on women's financial independence. I wasn't sure who had submitted my name. Maybe a former client, maybe someone who'd heard the rumors and wanted the truth. I accepted. The night before the event, I stood in front of my mirror and practiced the one line I knew I'd say. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes you just need to press the right button. The seminar hall was filled with women of every age, some fresh out of divorce, others rebuilding careers after children, many quiet but watching, like they were hoping someone might say what they couldn't yet put into words. When it was my turn to speak, I told them my story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I walked them through the systems I built, the ways I was erased, and the steps I took to rebuild not just my accounts, but my boundaries. The applause was unexpected. Loud, long. When I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed. 3 notifications. A restraining order granted against any further financial actions in my name. My ownership status reinstated in the family company's records. An updated ledger confirming I now held 60% controlling interest. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it. The applause still echoed behind me. The applause from the seminar had faded hours ago, but the echoes lived somewhere deep inside me, quiet, steady, affirming. I drove home alone that night, the lights of Austin blurring past my windshield, not in a hurry, not escaping anything this time. Justice had been served. And yet, peace is a strange thing. You think it'll feel like winning, like standing at the top of something, but it doesn't. At least, not all the time. Sometimes, peace just feels like silence. Like stillness after a storm that took too many pieces of you when it passed. Weeks slipped by after the court rulings. The headlines cooled. The texts stopped. The inbox no longer threatened. I moved into a modest modern house near the edge of town, far enough from the chaos, close enough to convenience. It had clean lines, natural light, and no memories embedded in the walls. Every morning, I watered the plants I never had time for in my old life. I ran my business from the sunroom, working quietly with women-led startups, guiding them toward independence, the way I wish someone had guided me 10 years ago. No more boards, no more family offices, just clarity and control. Still, I won't lie. There were mornings I woke up and felt that ache. The kind you can't put your finger on. Not sadness exactly, not loss, something heavier, something quieter, but not alone. Hestia came to live with me 2 weeks after the final hearing. She brought her books, her teacups, her quilts. She moved into the guest room, but every evening we shared the living room, trading stories, watching old black and white movies, folding laundry to Ella Fitzgerald and crossword puzzles. One afternoon, while we sat by the window folding hand towels, Christmas music drifted faintly from the speaker. Hestia looked at me and smiled, eyes warm beneath silver lashes. "You were always more family than they ever were," she said simply. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require repetition. That holiday season came with no formal invitations, no glossy cards from Valora, no obligatory RSVPs. No one called, no one emailed, and I didn't chase anyone down. The community saw through the performance long before the family did. Valora quietly disappeared from every local board she once lorded over. Her name faded from the printed programs at the church. The whispers weren't mine to start, but I didn't stop them either. Corwin resigned from the company. He signed over the remaining shares, citing personal reasons. I didn't ask what those reasons were. He'd made his choices, and I'd made mine. Sable tried to scrub her name from everything, but subpoenas don't care about Instagram. I never pursued criminal charges. I didn't need to. The civil wins were enough to draw a line so firm it echoed. Publicly, the Whitmores weren't taken down by scandal. They were cut off by a woman who refused to disappear quietly, and that I could live with. That year for Christmas, I hosted dinner. Nothing grand. Just me, Hestia, and 3 close friends, women I'd met through the seminar, each of them rebuilding something. We wore cozy sweaters, lit handmade candles, and filled the table with potluck dishes made from memory and heart. There was no head table, no power positions. But I had a chair. It wasn't plastic. It wasn't folded. It wasn't an afterthought shoved into a corner near the dishwasher. It was solid oak, hand-carved, dark-stained, with my name engraved across the back. It sat at the center of the table, not because I needed it to, but because I earned it, because I built it. As we raised our glasses, mine filled with sparkling cider, Hestia's with her usual Earl Grey, I looked around and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Warmth, wholeness, not perfection, but presence. I wasn't missing. I wasn't erased. I was here. I looked at the flame flickering in the center of the table and spoke, not loudly, but clearly. To those who sat me in the kitchen, I said with a small smile, "Thank you." My friends paused, glancing at each other. I held up my glass. "You taught me how to rise." Some battles don't need shouting, they need strategy. This story wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming identity, setting boundaries, and realizing that silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. Debria didn't fight with fists or fury. She fought with truth, proof, and power. Have you ever been pushed aside in your own family, told you didn't belong? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the quiet strength it takes to walk away from those who never deserved your loyalty. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this. Real lives, real lessons.